Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Virtual Connect series. Today, we've got a very interesting and hopefully intriguing program for many of you on demystifying fellowship. This continues our series on celebrating the best of what AIA does and what our members do. And fellowship, of course, for those of you who know at least a little bit about it, is the highest individual distinction a member can receive. It's the highest category of membership. It's usually reserved for about 2% of all of the members of the American Institute of Architects. And it is not, contrary to popular belief, a end of career laudatory saying, good job before you ride off into the sunset. It's something to recognize exemplary work and practices and community impact in 6 different objects of areas that you can be distinguished in. That does not have an age requirement. It's for anyone who's really been set above and beyond their peers. And so to hear more about that today, we have the longtime chair of the Fellows Nominating Committee, someone who has the distinction of having served on that jury himself and reviewed submissions from all over the country and even the world. And that's Phil Gerou. Phil has his own practice and has been involved at probably just about every seat you could hold at the state and regional level, and continues to give back to the organization to this day. So Phil, I will let you take it away after just a couple more housekeeping notes here. This session is best meant to have all of the content given up front, and then the questions come at the end, because oftentimes the questions will be answered in the session itself. And so we ask that you use the Q&A or the chat function as you think of questions to populate those, and I'll be watching for them. I'll come on at the end when Phil wraps up and we'll start feeding questions to you. And of course, if you want to wait till the end to ask the questions, we'll be sure to take them at that time as well. So if there's also someone that you know might be interested in this content later, we do plan on recording it and putting it on our YouTube page. Or if something slips by that you want to review, and you don't remember to ask a question about it, it'll be available for your viewing later as well. So with that being said, Phil, welcome and thanks for doing this. We have, I think you mentioned all the times you've done this at various formats and places, we might have the most people assembled in any one time for this particular seminar. We had 18 folks sign up to receive it.
Great. Welcome, everyone. This session usually takes about an hour and a half, including questions at the end, but we're going to try to do it a little quicker today, especially since it's being recorded, and but still cover all the material that we need to cover. Okay, there we go. Just to go over today's agenda briefly, there's a specific nomination process that Denver and Colorado goes through to nominate members for fellowship. There are dates that you have to meet those dates, and we'll go over what some of those are. Understanding the jury process. Who is the jury? What process do they go through? It's more complicated than you might think, but we'll go through all of that. And what is the jury looking for? What are the specifics? And why do some people that are eminently qualified to be fellows, why aren't they selected? And what are some of those reasons? The process, there's some great resources available from national and locally. We'll go through some of the statistics and data from recent judgings. And why would you go through this process anyway? It's a very difficult process to put together. You're trying to catalog an entire career, and we're doing this in February, but the final submittals aren't due until October. So why are we doing it so early? Well, it usually takes that long to put together your submittal. The nominating committee was actually a Denver chapter nominating committee back in 1992. And it was kind of an ad hoc committee when it originally started. I know Dan Habacost was there. I think Jim Sudler might have been on it. There were just some existing fellows that got together, and they realized that Denver chapter had not had a new fellow in about 8 years. And the main reason they hadn't had a new fellow in 8 years is they hadn't bothered to nominate one. So they decided, they selected 6 members, and all 6 were elevated in 1993. And that was the best year we've ever had, is 6 fellows in 1 year. But it's that nominating committee, which is now made up of 9 people, and it's now a Colorado statewide committee. We have members from Boulder and from Aspen and from around the Colorado Springs to try to identify nominees, review their qualifications, and we interview and consult with them. We don't always nominate somebody that has submitted a preliminary submittal to the committee. But if we don't nominate them, we meet with them and explain why we didn't nominate them. And we make recommendations to them on how they can improve their submittals. Once we have approved a nomination by the committee, we are required to take it before the AIA Colorado board and have them ratify it. We used to say approved, and that opened it up for conversations that we really didn't want to have. So we just said, no, you can ratify it. So that's what we're doing now, is we're bringing names before the board to ratify. And we currently have quite a list of people that have been nominated and ratified. The difficulty is those people finding the time to actually put together the kind of submittal that's required by national to go in front of the jury. And then the committee also, usually individuals on the committee will work with the nominee, and first thing we do is this demystifying session. But we also consult with them. We show them other resources, and put them in contact with other fellows if need be. Some important dates I already mentioned that are coming up in October, and we haven't set I checked the AIA website yesterday. They haven't set a date yet. It's usually October 10th, somewhere around there, that the electronic submissions are due. As of 2008, they've accepted only electronic submissions. Before that, you had to submit 3 copies of your submission in a 3-ring binder and mail it back to national. Now it's naturally all done electronically. The reference letters are due then. There are 7 reference letters. We'll talk a little bit about what those are, because we've got some pretty good recommendations on that. And there are very specific requirements. In part, the timing. It's usually 5 p.m. Eastern time. Don't start uploading at 4:30 because it won't get done. Hopefully you can upload and make sure that your submittal is there in September. That would be great if you could do it that early and get it done. Because waiting till the last minute isn't great, even though that's sometimes what we do in real life. Then in the last week of January each year, that's when the jury of 7 fellows gets together and goes over the submissions. And in early February, usually the day right after the last day the jury meets, email notification goes out to the chapters and to everybody who has submitted on whether they have been selected as a fellow or not. This year's jury of fellows, here are the names. Some of them may be familiar to you. If they are familiar to you, I can almost guarantee that that is not going to benefit you. There are 7 jurors and only 6 vote. The 7th one, if that person works in your office or some branch of your office, or is even from your local region, they sit out that level of voting. So a personal contact on there or knowledge of who these people are probably isn't going to be any great benefit to you. You can see that they come from a variety of geographic areas. They come from all over the country. They also come from a variety of firm sizes. Some work in government, some are retired, some work in small firms. Some do residential, some do high rises, some do hospitals. They really try to diversify the jury so that if there's a specific thing that the jury needs to look at, there's probably an expert on the jury that can talk to that location or that specific project type. This is a spreadsheet that I put together that shows the very right-hand column is those are the people that are on the jury this year. And this is how they're selected. The very left-hand column is the region. I have this going back another 10 years or so. And they are selected by region. And if you look at just the graphic, you can see that somebody is on the jury for 3 years, and then nobody from that region is on the jury for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. And finally, that region's turn comes up and another person is appointed from that region. The very bottom line is, bottom left-hand corner is me. I was on the jury in 2007, 8, and 9. And we just had a few months ago, R.K. Stewart nominated or elevated to the jury from the Western Mountain region. Those of you who are familiar with R.K. Stewart know he's not a Western Mountain region guy. He's San Francisco. But I believe he recently retired, and when he did, he retired to Salt Lake City. And so, and being a past president of the Institute, he was a known name and a logical person to add to the jury, and certainly qualified. And so he is now representing Western Mountain region. So if anyone from Colorado or the Western Mountain region is interested in being on the Fellows jury, it's probably going to be another 6 or 7 or 8 years before the Western Mountain region will have another representative on the jury. The jury gets together, as I mentioned, in January each year. And this is the room back at national headquarters where the jury gets together. And basically everybody has their laptops and they're able to access everybody's submittal. As we're looking through the submittals, everybody's looking at the same submittal at the same time, but each person is probably looking at a different reference letter or a different part of the submittal or the sponsored letter. They're looking at a part of the submittal that they're interested in that particular time. Each person on the jury reviews 1/7 of the submittals, as you might expect. And based on the number of submittals that they get each year, there's usually 240 to 260 submittals. And it's been that way for a long, long time. It hasn't really gone up very much over the years, even though membership in the AIA has. So in late December, each one of the 7 jurors gets given 1/7, 32, 34 of the submittals to review. And that juror, if they are given your submittal, that juror will take probably 3 to 4 hours to read every word, to understand your submittal in great detail, and to know exactly what it is you're there for and what your story is. And they will take all the time they need to do that. Sometimes it takes 5 hours. And that's why you are given, a juror is given from the end of December to basically the end of January, a 4-week period, to go over the 35 submittals times 4 hours. It's like a month's worth of work to review all those submittals. It's the job of each one of the jurors to then bring that name forward, and it's all done alphabetically. Try not to be biased in any way when the names are brought forward to the jury. But the juror that has reviewed the submittal, and they're not, like I mentioned, they're not allowed to review the submittal by anybody within their region or anybody that works for their firm. So they have excused themselves from that part of it. So they will present the candidates, and they'll take the time they need to describe it. Now, saying the time they need is a little bit misleading, because as you see at the bottom of this slide, the jury discussion is 10 to 12 minutes per nominee. Now, you have just spent 7 months putting together your submittal, and the entire jury is looking at it in 10 minutes. So how do you present your career to a group of architects that you've only got 10 minutes to do it? Well, first of all, the juror is there. The juror that has spent 4 hours looking at it will present and as it says here, draw attention to what does or does not support the claims that you're making in your submittal. And they'll also answer any questions from the jurors. And finally, they'll make a recommendation. And the recommendation will be, I think this person should be elevated to fellowship, or I don't believe it. I think this person should wait a year or two. I don't think this person is qualified. But it's up to that one juror to make that recommendation to the rest of the jurors. So obviously, if you've got 10, 11, or 12 minutes for your case to be presented verbally by the juror, but also visually and through your reference letters and through a submittal that is probably about 40 pages long, you have to be clear and concise. It has to be results oriented, and it has to be well documented. Only 6 jurors will vote on your submittal. One of them sits out, and the one that sits out is the juror that's from your region or your firm. Or if there's nobody from your region or firm, then the person who is online to present next, the next person, sits out, and that's when they take their potty breaks. It takes a minimum of 4 votes, because you have to have a majority of the 6 jurors that are voting. It doesn't have to be unanimous. And there are often ties. How often? Out of 250 submittals, probably about 12, 15, somewhere in that range, will be ties, 3 to 3. And they'll discuss it, and if they can't quickly come to some resolution, those ties will be set off to the side and brought up in day 5 of the jury process. The jury meets for 5 days, And the first 4 days are usually about 12-hour days that they meet. They usually get together about 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little before, and they'll go till at least 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And they will go right through lunch and right through dinner. And AIA brings in food and says, here's your food, keep judging. And it's just, at the end of the 4 days, it's a grueling process, but it's also one of the most valuable processes, one of the most enjoyable processes you can go through, because you're seeing the cream of the crop. You're seeing some absolutely stunning work, some great work by our members. It's often been, the jury's been accused of having a quota. Why does it keep coming up 40% that are elevated each year? And the next year is 41%, the next year is 38. Why is it so consistent? And there must be a quota. No, there is no quota. And there's no quota by category or component or region. There's always accusations that, oh my gosh, you guys are just elevating New York, Texas, and California. Well, New York, Texas, and California certainly get their share of fellows, but they have their share of the population too. So it's the accusations are always there, but it's not true. What is the jury looking for? Has the nominee been nationally recognized? That is great if they have been. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is certainly a good point in your behalf. Has the nominee had a ripple effect? You have designed a great hospital, and it's great because there's cutting edge ways of transferring information in and out, and there's a new thing that you have done because of that hospital. That's great. It's great for that hospital, but is there a ripple effect? Has that system been duplicated in other hospitals by other architects? Have you spoken about what you have done at conferences and told people this is why this hospital is exceptional and you can do this too? Has it been recognized by awards that would get word out that hey, there's this special hospital that was done in Duluth. Let's copy it. Let's build on that. And of course, has the nominee been active in the AIA? You always have to remember that above all, FAIA is an AIA award. And so if you have no involvement in the AIA, if you've never been on a committee or spoken at a conference or been part of a jury for the AIA, that's not going to help, because it is an AIA award, and so they're going to want to see some dedication to the organization. What else is the jury looking for? A sponsor letter. You will have a sponsor, and we'll talk about how you select that sponsor in a minute. And it's a one-page letter, and that has to spell out your career. It has to spell out, it's an outline of what is coming in the next 40 pages of your submittal. It has to say in one page why that sponsor believes that you are eligible and you warrant fellowship. And then strong, specific reference letters. You're allowed 7 letters. Again, we'll talk about exactly what those letters ought to be and who they should be from. Well organized and not to exceed 40 pages. If you exceed 40 pages, they think you're not being concise enough, and it also forces you to consolidate your submittal a bit. 10-point font is minimum. Now, there have been submittals that have been rejected by national for some very particular things, and you would, and I'll talk about one in a little bit here, but if you don't exactly follow the rules, if you don't get all 7 reference letters in there, for some reason you only have 6, you aren't going to be selected. They want to know why. What happened to that 7th reference? What's the problem? So you have to follow the rules precisely. You have to have a summary statement that is not overreaching. We as a jury, we looked at one submittal where somebody was head of a committee. It was a PR kind of committee for national, and they were chair of this, and they were also on the national board of directors at the time. And that person said that, you know, when he got on that, and he was on that, chaired that committee for like 3 years, and they did some very specific things for outreach for AIA. And when he did those, over that 3-year period, the number of members in the AIA went from 72,000 to 78,000. And he was actually taking credit for 6,000 new members in the AIA because of what his committee did and because he chaired that committee. That's a little bit of overreaching. And I don't remember where we fell on whether he was elevated or not, but that certainly doesn't help your argument when you make that kind of overstatement. High quality images. If you have a really good photograph of one of your projects, probably not good enough. You need excellent photography. You need, remember, these are 7 fellows, these are 7 architects that you are trying to impress, and they are impressed by great images and great exhibits. They're going to be looking for consistency, not just in the presentation that you're making, but consistency in your career, that you have been speaking at conferences, but you haven't just been speaking in the last 3 years. You've been speaking for the last 26 years at conferences and spreading the word about what architecture is and what your role in it is. They will look for leadership. What has been your leadership? Have you led local neighborhood groups? Have you led AIA, state, national? And the results. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute here. They are going to be looking for published work. They're going to be looking for award recognition. The publications, if they are more national than they are a Sunday newspaper insert, the national publication is going to carry more weight. So that's what they're going to be looking for. Award recognition. If you won your local chapter award, if you won a Sunset Magazine award, if you won one from some other organization, that's okay, and it will help build your case. But the award recognition, if it is a state award or a regional award, or particularly a national award of some kind, that's going to help build your case all the more. Has what you've done, has it had an impact on other practices? Have other firms said, look what he's doing, we ought to do that? Have you lectured on this? A number of years ago, Jim Leggett from Denver, as part of his submittal, put together a spreadsheet of his lecturing. And it was different conferences where he had gone to speak about what he does, and how many people were in the audience, how long the session was, which means it was an hour and a half long. So if there's 100 people in the audience, that's 150 hours of learning unit time. And how much of that time have you done? Well, when Jim put together his submittal, he added it up in the spreadsheet, and there were 12,000 learning units that he had done, all volunteer, at AIA conferences and regional conferences and just everywhere, teaching other architects what he did and how he did it. And that certainly helped build his case. And national leadership. And not just the leadership, but what you did when you were in that leadership position. And did it make a difference that you were in that role? Publications, awards. Have you been requested to speak at different conferences? Have you been on juries? Are there the publications that you've made, are they in architectural journals, or are they in magazines, or general interest stories in local newspapers? That makes a big difference. And certainly national news media and peer recognition is going to be looked at. Leadership in the AIA national office. When I submitted for fellowship, I had just come off 4 years on the national board and a year as vice president of the Institute at National. And that didn't get me fellowship, but it helped build the case. Local and regional offices certainly help, committee chairs, but what did you do on that committee? One example that I've used in the past is It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. And in that movie, he's shown what life would be like if he wasn't around to do the things he did. And that's what the jury is going to be asking. When you were that committee chair, what did you do that made a difference? If somebody else was sitting in that chair, would the committee have done the same thing anyway? Or if, because of your leadership and your guidance and everything that you put into it, something different happened, what was that? And why is that important to the Institute and the profession? Have you authored articles? Have you presented at conventions? In general, the impact and the results of what you've done. If you spoke at a convention and there's only 3 people in the audience, not great. But if there's 150 people, 250, great. You're getting the word out, and obviously what you have done is important to those people to come listen. Getting into your submission, the one that goes to National in October, there's a sponsor letter, and it has to be part of your submission, and it is bound right in. That's the first page. Page 1 is your sponsor letter, and it's on the sponsor's stationery, and like I said, it spells out everything that they're about to read through the rest of the sections of your submittal. The summary of achievements is about a 2-page long summary, and you really want to focus on about 3 things. It can be 2, it can be 4. Usually you can come up with 3 areas where you've really had an impact on the profession, and focus on those. If you give them a list of, these are the 28 things, it gets lost. You have to give the jury, and give that one juror that's looking at your submittal, give them a focus of why should they be reading this submittal, and why are you worthy of fellowship. Fellowship is not, as Mike said at the very beginning, it's not a career. It's, boy, you've done this for 50 years and here's your F. It's not it. What have you done that is over and above? You work 8 to 5, you get paid for that. That's what you do. That's your job. Your job is to be a good architect. That's not what a fellow is. A fellow takes that information and speaks at conferences. They publish things. They are recognized for what they do. They get awards. They publish books. They get the word out. They do something over and above. They donate their time to community organizations. They donate their expertise to communities in Africa that need their help. There's a lot of different ways that people basically take their spare time and make it valuable. Section 2 is going to be that's the meat of your submittal. You will outline the awards you've been given, the publications you've been given, your volunteer work, the lectures, all of that in section 2. And that section could be 30 pages long. It's going to be, there's a lot. And part of that, although there is a separate exhibit section, section 3, you can use section 2 to show some exhibits. And you can embed photographs of work. You can embed diagrams. You can embed logos of organizations that you've volunteered time to. There's lots of ways to use graphics. And again, as I mentioned, you're presenting to 7 architects. They like graphics. They like graphic things more than words usually. But there's certainly an opportunity to do that. It's also a good place where you can embed quotes in your submittal. That you have 7 sponsor letters and you have 7 people that are talking specifically about different aspects of your career. But what if you have 8 or 9 or 10 people? Well, that's where you can take some quotes from those 8th, 9th, and 10th people and embed them in section 2, and you can get your point across in that section. And basically the 7 letters that are your reference letters, those you want to have them verify everything else that you've said you did and the impact you had. You've already said all that in section 2. But did you really do all that? And did you really work on those projects? And that's where the references come in and say, boy, I worked with that person on that project, and that project would have been nothing without this person. And what they did is XYZ to make this project special. The sponsor that you pick has to be a member, but not necessarily a fellow. If they are a fellow, that's good, but it's certainly not required. When I submitted mine a number of years ago, I picked an AIA member, but he wasn't a fellow, but he was an AIA member that was the most familiar with the broad history of what I had been involved in. They have to provide that 1 letter of support, as I said, and they also should be your best and worst critic. Somebody that will work with you through the process, help you put together your submittal, will look at it and they'll be a cheerleader for you and let you know that this is the time to toot your horn. This is the time to really show what you have done and lay it all out there. And also look at that and say, wait a minute, you can do this better. You can write that better. They need to be a critic on this too. If that person is a fellow, it's very helpful because they've been through the process and they know what it takes. So that would be one reason why you would want to use a fellow as a sponsor. But there's other fellows that are available that can review your submittal as well. That sponsor can be a sponsor for more than one candidate. Years ago, when John Anderson was being asked to, he was national president back in the early 2000s. And so anybody that was submitting from Colorado would ask Andy if he would be their sponsor. And usually he would do 2 or 3 a year. And then if a fourth person came up and asked him, he'd say, you know, not this year, maybe next year, and you know, ask someone else. Because if the jury is sitting there and they see a sponsor letter coming in, and it's so difficult to write 4 different sponsor letters and have them be totally unique. And if those letters are coming in, it starts looking a little fishy when they all come from one sponsor. They have to be, hopefully, not just very knowledgeable, but the person that is most knowledgeable. It could be a partner in your firm, although that can be dangerous sometimes, because sometimes it looks very self-serving, because if you have a fellow in your firm, it's a good thing. So it might not be your partner, it might be somebody that just knows you well, but it's got to be, maybe it's somebody that you worked with 20 years ago, and you worked with them for 8 years, and you've been away for 12, but you get together with them every other weekend. It's whoever knows you the best. You would want that person to be involved in the submission process, and to keep you on track. You know, let's start this in March or April, and let's set some benchmarks so that you have basically your submittal put together by July or August, that it's ready to go, but you are eternally editing this and trying to get it, and having other fellows review it ahead of time, so that it's the best submittal it can be. And if that person can help you through the process and can be involved in all of that, that's great. They don't have to be. If you're good, if you are structured enough that you can do that on your own, then don't worry about it. But it's very helpful to have a sponsor that does do that. The sponsor also serves as a buffer between you and your references. They are basically they bird dog the letters. You have to make sure those 7 letters are sent in, and they are sent in directly to AIA, and they are not sent to you. Now, usually the references will send you copies of what they send to national, but they're not required to, and they really shouldn't. They should just send them to national. National, the whole reason it takes them from October to December to put together the submittals that they can go out to the jurors is that staff at national has to go through 260 submittals, 7 reference letters. They have to make sure that 5 of those are from AIA people who have paid their dues that year, and they are dues paying members, and they're actual AIA members. 2 of the references don't need to be from AIA members, but they have to go through all of those letters and make sure that people are really members, and if they aren't, the submittal gets tossed out. There are 5 objects, and some of you probably know this already, but there are 5 objects that you can submit in. And figuring out which object you're in is sometimes a slam dunk. Sometimes you don't really know. Design is usually pretty cut and dried, and it's design, urban design, or you know, preservation work. You have to have 5 projects, although if you put together a submittal that only has 5 projects, they're going to wonder why. You know, why didn't they have 10 projects in here? And those need to be projects where you are largely responsible for design. And there will be a signature line on the bottom of your exhibits that say, this person was largely responsible for design. A number of years ago, Paul Hutton from Denver submitted, and he didn't get it his first year. And he got a debriefing and found out that he had gotten the signatures on each one of his exhibits saying largely responsible for design, like he should have. But when he made the PDFs, one of the PDFs cut off the signature line off the bottom edge. And so he didn't have a signature on that exhibit. And so his entire submittal was rejected. So very critical to make sure that you get those signatures. The jury doesn't judge your design. They're architects. They appreciate good design, but they are not going to judge it. And if you have never won a regional award or a state award or a national award, or have some kind of recognition from a jury somewhere, they're not going to look kindly on the submittal, even if the architecture is stunning. They're not going to do it. And they also look for peer recognition, not just awards, but have your peers written articles about you? Have you had articles written about you that explain why what you have done is so exceptional? Object 2, education, literature, research, practice. So obviously, if you're a college professor, this is where you fall. If you are a good example, Fentress Bradburn. When Kurt Fentress submitted, he went in design. That's what he does. When Jim Bradburn submitted, he went in object 2, because he takes those designs and he makes it work. And he is the guy in the office that puts together the details, figures out how the structure is going to work. That he doesn't do the design, but he makes sure that the project gets done. And you all have people like that in your office. And that's where a lot of people fall in this category. Actually, we'll look at statistics later on this, but that's where most people fall, is in this category. Most of the submittals come in object 2. And you might design glass storefronts, and all you do is the storefront design. That's your specialty. This is your category. Having a good firm is your job, but have you shared it with the profession? That's the question. Is it a specialty practice? You might not have honor awards, but that's okay. You can still be elevated to fellowship. And in education, you need to show the impact, and showing the work of your students, maybe even the awards that your students have won because of the classes that you've taught them. That's all part of it. Object 3, leading the institute or organization. You have been chapter president, you've been state president, you've been regional secretary, you've been on the national board. But the jury is looking for the so what factor. You were on the national board for 3 years. So what? What difference did you make? What is there, because back to Jimmy Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life, because you were there, was the world a different place? Is what you did because you were around, did it make a difference? And what are those results? What results? You weren't just keeping a chair warm. You had results. You can lead another organization, NCARB. We have Ken Du Bois has been so active in NCARB and in doing work for them. You know, that all helped build into his fellowship. Did you help connect that organization back to AIA somehow? Sponsoring conferences jointly, or somehow tying the profession back to whatever that other organization is. Object 4. Object 3, 4, and 5 probably total are maybe 10 or 15% of the total submittals. So these are not the big categories. The big categories are number 2 and number 1 design. And that's where 75 or 80% or 90% of the submittals come from. But this is government and industry. One of the people that I was on the jury with, she was in charge of naval architecture that's being done for the Navy. And she had a budget, annual budget of something like $2 or $3 billion of projects that she oversaw, and just overseeing them, great. But why? Because she was overseeing them, did they turn out differently? Was there a benefit to AIA? Again, it's an AIA award. And so if you can show benefit to the Institute of Architects, you need to do that. Have you affected policies or even legislation? Are you making things easier or better for other architects in the profession? And then number 5 is kind of a catch-all for you didn't really, maybe you, there was an architect from South Carolina, somewhere in the South, where he was head of a community organization that helped local neighborhood groups, and it really wasn't even architecture. It was volunteer time to, it was service to society. And it was, he had done it for years, and it was outstanding work, and he could show results. But it wasn't necessarily AIA. It was a little bit departed from what most of us would think is an architecture award. Volunteer work not to be used as a marketing tool. I have seen submittals before that where someone says, oh yes, I volunteered here, and oddly enough, a year later, they gave me a project. And then I volunteered for this group over here, and oh yeah, I wound up doing their headquarters building. And it sounds terribly self-serving when your volunteer work leads to projects for your office. I mean, it may happen, but if it happens all the time, it starts looking pretty self-serving. Your fellowship submission. It's a story about you, but it's not womb to tomb. We don't care where you went to grade school or high school. It's who you are, what you've accomplished, when it was accomplished, why is it significant? You did this, but so what? And how it benefited or was shared with the profession. Again, speaking engagements or juries. Then you need to prove it and provide documentation and support. And part of that is certainly your reference letters. Oop. I'm sorry, we'll back up here. Section 1 is the summary, and this is where you lay out your case. Now, one of the first parts of the summary will be a 25 to 35 word description of why you are getting fellowship. And when you get your fellowship medal at the convention and you are being called up on stage, they will read what you write sometimes. About a third of the time, whoever the juror was that read your submittal and reviewed it will rewrite that 25 to 35 word thing. And they'll say, yes, because of outstanding work and donating to the blah, 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 but they'll explain why you are coming up on stage and getting your medal. And it's basically your architectural tombstone. Here lies so-and-so who did this. And tombstones aren't large. You only get 25 or 35 words. And so you start off your summary with that one caption. And then, as I said before, try to focus on about 3 main points. Years ago, Temple Buell submitted, and this was back in the day when it was a 3-ring binder. And when Temple submitted, and he was old when he submitted, but he basically made copies of newspaper articles, and it was like a 4-inch 3-ring binder that was just packed with stuff. And the jurors looked at it and said, what's his story? What's he trying to tell me here? And they could not sift. He didn't make it the first year because they couldn't sift through all of the stuff. The second year, he got with somebody who could help him out a little bit and got him to focus on 3 main things. This is what he did. He donated to the profession. He invented the modern shopping mall, and he forget, but he focused it, and he naturally got it the next year. Be clear, be concise, be succinct. Restate the claims that have already been mentioned in the sponsor letter, because you can expand on those here a little bit. And prove the ripple effect. If you, the hospital example that I gave, if what you did was so outstanding that it's been copied 9 times, or you've been asked to speak on it, or you wrote an article about it, or you got recognition for it, what was the effect beyond I designed a neat project? Local work is okay, but you need to show a broad impact. We had one submittal from Obi Bowman. If you don't know Obi, he does outstanding. If you go anywhere on the California, Oregon, or southern state of Washington coast, there is a coastal architecture there that is Obi Bowman. He has won 30 or 40 or 50 regional awards for his work. He never won a national award, but he's won every regional award you could imagine. And he submitted, in the first year, the jury looked at it and said, he's just a regional guy. He doesn't get fellowship. The next year, the jury makeup changed a little bit. Out of the 7 members, about 2 go off every year and about 2 come on every year. And so the makeup changes a little bit. And that next jury said, doesn't matter. He has had so much impact on that region that he's worthy. And he got fellowship the next year. And it was basically the same submittal. It was just the makeup of the jury that changed a little bit. What is yours? Accomplishments. I looked at the submittal recently where the architect listed the projects and he described the projects and said, this project was great because of XYZ, and really outstanding, nice projects. Never mentioned what he did to make those projects outstanding. And architects by nature are somewhat introverted. We like to sit at our table and do our work. But this is not the time for that. This is the time for tooting your horn, for getting word out on what you have done. And in part, that's where your sponsor is going to help you, because they're going to help you get out of your shell and get out of your comfort zone. That this is the time to do it. Have you done jury service on design juries, presentations, lectures, AIA involvement? All of these accomplishments go together to help build the case. Demonstrate your broad influence and impact. You can reformat from the format that they give you, but don't stray very far, and don't try to get tricky with any kinds of lines and arrows and pointers. And you can have bullet points that call attention to specific items, but they're not interested in how clever you are with graphics here. Don't change the format a lot. Keep within that format and tell your story within the format that they give you. Group similar accomplishments together. Sometimes when you are showing awards or articles or speaking engagements, just showing a list of speaking engagements doesn't help. But if those speaking engagements are, here's a list of the 4 speaking engagements that I did at a national conference. Here are the 7 that I did at a regional conference, and here are the 6 that I did at local conferences. Then they don't have to sift through there. They don't have to try to figure out which one of these are local and which ones aren't, and which ones were to other organizations. Help them understand quickly, if you can, the story you're trying to tell. Same thing with awards. Group the awards by national, local, other organizations, AIA awards, non-AIA awards. And then within each one of those groups, do it chronologically or some way that they can understand very quickly. Explain time gaps. If there is a gap in your professional career, explain it. Martha Bennett, who I worked with years ago at John Anderson's office, she submitted for fellowship, and she was so active when she first got licensed, and she was on national committees and Women in Architecture, and she was my gosh, I mean, it was impressive what she did. And then for like 12 or 14 years, there was a gap where she wasn't that involved in AIA. And then she came back later on and started getting involved again and doing incredible things again. When she first submitted, she didn't explain that 14-year gap. It wasn't part of her submittal. The next year she went back and said, oh, by the way, for 14 years, I was creating one of the largest women-owned firms in the Rocky Mountain region. And this is what that firm was doing. When she did that, then it was a slam dunk. She got fellowship. But she needed to explain that time gap. And like I said, divide up the awards into national, local, regional, AIA, non-AIA. Try to group them. If you just give them a list 3 pages long, it gets lost. In the articles, help them by, do they have to read through the whole article to figure out, and it might, even after reading an entire article, they might not be able to figure out if the article was about you or by you or just about one of your projects. Tell them what the article is. Help them out. Showing tangible results. Again, that just keeps showing up. What are the results? Show more than a minimum of 5 projects. The 5 is the minimum, but like I said, if you only show 5, they want to know why. And if you have 10 projects, but one of them has, maybe it was done 30 years ago and the photography is a little, not great. It's okay, drop that one out. Go down to 9 projects and keep the ones that have the really great photography. And using your strongest projects. Don't throw everything but the kitchen sink in there. Keep the ones that have won the awards, that got you the recognition, that you had the biggest impact on. That's what you should be showing. And one picture is worth 1,000 words. Like I said, it's architects that are looking at this and they like pictures. Your 7 reference letters, you need to actually not just ask 7 people to write reference letters for you. You need to help structure those letters for them. You need to tell them the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you'd like them to say in the letter. You remember that project we worked on 9 years ago? If you could just say something about what my involvement was and the awards that we won because of it, and if I was good to work with or not. Give them some bullet points. So you've probably all had to write reference letters, and you know it's sometimes not easy, but if you can be given a little bit of a format, it helps. That also helps you because you need these 7 reference letters to tell 7 different stories. You don't want them all telling the same story. If 2 people know you because of one specific project, pick one of those people that's going to tell the story the best. If this comes from recognized leaders, that's great. Broad geographic range. There was a submittal from Aspen that I saw where all his sponsors or all his reference letters came within Pitkin County. Got to have a broader impact than that. This is a good place to show that broad impact, that maybe all the projects were local, but this guy came from Texas or from someplace else, and so show that geographic range. Avoid big names offering little substance. A question was asked a number of years ago by Jim Mortar from Vail, who asked a juror from the previous year if having good names on your reference letters would help. And the juror said, like who? And he said, oh, like, I don't know, Jack Nicklaus and Jerry Ford, who were 2 of his clients up in Vail. And the answer was, use Jerry Ford or Jack Nicklaus if they can write that walk on water letter, if they can write that letter that talks about your exceptional contribution to their project. If they can write that letter, then great, use those persons. But if not, a big name isn't going to do you any good unless they write an exceptional letter for you. Strong sponsor, strong specific references, specific in 7 different areas or 7 different projects. All of that has to support your summary statement, and focusing on results and your influence. There are some myths. One of them is that it's best to only get fellows to write your reference or sponsor letters. No. Out of the 7 reference letters, 5 have to be AIA members. If they're fellows, better, but they still have to write that exceptional letter. And then 2 people can, the last 2 can either be AIA members or can be your mom and your minister. It doesn't matter. Just 2 other people, clients that have worked with you. But you have to have at least 5 AIA members writing those letters. Again, they don't have to be big names. They can be your mom. It doesn't matter, as long as they are writing a letter that builds your case. You can't get fellowship unless you, in Object 1, unless you have a national award. OB Bowman proves that you don't. It's great if you can, if you do, but it's not necessary. Horizontal format is preferred, like the one we're looking at right here. Doesn't have to be. Some of the very first electronic submittals that came through were some horizontal, some vertical. They were put together and they would send in 7 different PDFs and you didn't know what order they came in. It was the first couple of years that we did the electronic submittals, it was a fiasco. It took forever to go through those submittals. It's gotten much more standardized, but you want to keep it easy. Now, the person reviewing this is looking at it on his computer. And so if you can keep it to a horizontal format, it helps. These are the statistics from 2019. These aren't this year's statistics, but this year's haven't changed very much. Last year we had 280 or so candidates. 41% were elevated. That's kind of typical. This year, I think it was even a little less. I think the total elevated was around 105. And so the percentage was down a little bit. Second year, you're allowed to submit 3 years in a row. If you don't make it the first year, you can submit a second year. The difference is you can revise your submittal and give them a new submittal. And you're also allowed 3 additional reference letters. Now, if one of the reference letters in the first year was cause for you to not get fellowship, you might not know it because you don't know the contents of all of those letters. And those 7 letters go back in your second year. You're just adding 3 letters in your second year, adding 3 more in the third year if you don't make it your second year. There was one submittal that we looked at as a jury where there was a poison letter in the submittal. There was a letter from a person's partner in previous firm, and the letter basically said this person didn't work on those projects. They weren't project manager on them. They had nothing to do with design. I have no idea why he's claiming credit for this. It was just a letter that as soon as a juror read that, they said, I'm not going there. And for 3 years he submitted, not knowing that that poison letter was in there, because even in your debriefing, AIA staff can't tell you that. They can't tell you what's in those letters. So he never got it, and he never knew why. Couldn't tell him. I believe the staff person did say you might check your reference letters. I think they could say that, but they couldn't get any more specific than that. Now, in the third year, there were only 4 people elevated out of the third year. Now, and that's only 23%. Now, if you haven't made it the first 2 years, the chances of you making it in the third year are not great. Although you have to know that the jury really labors over those third year submissions. And they know there are people on the jury that have looked at it for 3 years, and this is their third year on the jury, and they're looking at them again, and they will anguish over those. They will find any reason they can to elevate this person to fellowship if there's a way, because they know if they don't get it now, odds are they're not coming back again. You're allowed to, but if you don't get it in your third year, you're probably pretty discouraged, and you're not going to come back again. Although there was a local architect who submitted 3 years in a row and didn't get it any of those 3 years, and then in the fourth year, you can't submit. You have to sit out a year. And then in the fifth year, you're allowed to come back and resubmit as a first year submittal again. And he submitted in his fifth year as if it was his first year submittal, and he had changed enough things in his submittal. The story was the same. It was the same architect, the same qualifications. He was just changing the story a little bit. and how he told it and how it came across. And in the 5th year, he got it. By object, again, there's, look at the numbers for object 1 and object 2. That's where most of the people submit. And object 1 is, in fact, a very easy one to judge, because you're not judging the design. You're judging whether they got awards for their design. Object 3 is sometimes difficult because the person is saying, I was president of this and chair of that, but did they have any results because of why they were there? It's hard to quantify those results sometimes, or prove those results. Specific to Colorado, we've had a total of 101 fellows. 65 of those are still living. Earliest one was Francis Cooper, who was made a fellow in 1889. How does that happen, you ask? AIA started in 1857 and was basically an East Coast, New York organization for a long time. In 1884, a group out of Chicago decided that they weren't really represented well, and they began the Western Association of Architects, brand new group. It was very popular, in part because the annual dues for the Western Association were $2 a year, and AIA at the time was charging $10 a year. So a lot of people were joining the Western Association, and an architect named Francis Cooper, who was living in Pueblo at the time, was a member of that organization. In 1889, the two organizations came together and bonded. They merged. And one of the requirements that the Western Association of Architects made was that, okay, we'll join you, but everybody who is a member of the Western Association of Architects needs to be called a fellow. And so even though there wasn't a real strict definition of what a fellow was, Francis Cooper was made one, and he's one of the 101 that we've had in this state. The next one in Colorado was Robert Roeschlaub back in 1900. Out of the 101, there have been 10 women, most in recent years, because we were a male-dominated profession for years, and now we're becoming a female-dominated profession, as well we should. Elizabeth Wright Ingram, Frank Lloyd Wright's granddaughter, was the first one in 1995. She tried to submit in 1994, and one of the requirements, one of the basic requirements for submitting for fellow is you have to be a member of the AIA for 10 years, not 10 consecutive years, 10 cumulative years. And so when she submitted her preliminary submittal to the local committee, we looked it up, and she had only been a member for 9 years. So we had to tell her, maybe next year, and which is something you really don't want to tell Elizabeth. The average age of fellows is 57. The oldest in Colorado, in fact, the oldest in the nation, was Temple Hoing Buell at the age of 87, almost 88 years old. And the youngest in Colorado, and he was the youngest architect in the country at the time, back in the, when was it, 1966 or so, that Lamar got fellowship. And he was just over 41 years old when he got it. In 1993, there was an architect from Baltimore, Al Rubling, who was 38 years old, and there may have been somebody in between there, but in 1993, Al was the youngest. And then a few years later, in the early 2000s, There was an architect who had worked for Hugh Newell Jacobson back on the East Coast and had branched out on his own, and he had won half a dozen national design awards at the age of 37, and he became a fellow. So it is possible to become a fellow at a younger age, but the average age in Colorado, and actually the average age nationally, is about 57. Here are some known names, local names, and national, international names, and when they became fellow. Walter Gropius didn't get it till he was 71. And then there's various people in the right-hand column from Colorado, and some names that you will probably recognize, who got it at all kinds of different ages. Comments back from the jury. Precise, clear, and focused. We've talked about that. Limit it to 40 pages. Anything over that begins to lose focus. Number your pages and use 10-point fonts. There's some of these very basic things that people need to follow. Look at the best examples, and you can do that right now. You can go to the AIA website, and they have picked over the last 2 or 3 years, and they just picked from recent years people in each category. So go to the category that you think you're in, and read some of those. Some of those are going to scare you, because being on the national jury, I reviewed a total of about 660 submittals, and it is very humbling to look at those, because these are people that are exceptional. There was one that I reviewed that he had designed the Acropolis Museum. And I was so hoping that this wasn't the Acropolis Museum in North Platte or something. But I opened it up, and there was the Acropolis Museum. And he had done that, and it's a stunning project. And there are a few of those each year that the jury, that they are so outstanding that the juror will just say, please just take the next 10 minutes and enjoy this submittal. I don't need to say anything else about it. Just enjoy this, because this is so outstanding that as jurors, we deserve the next 10 minutes of just awe of looking at these people. Put your most recent projects first. Concise doesn't mean sparse. Don't leave empty space on your pages just to show empty space. And the jury is not your friend. You have to prove it to them that you deserve this. And they're all fellows, and so they're going to be a little protective of the organization that they're in. Get the attributions and the language correct. Don't forget the signatures. List the education that's relevant. We really don't care that you were an Eagle Scout. We really don't. It's kind of neat, but yeah, don't really care. Bullet points, help break it up. You know what it's like to read a run-on paragraph. It's not fun. So make it readable. Make sure to list your local chapter. One of the things to keep in mind is that you really ought to be nominated by your local chapter. And we have a local nominating committee that will accept preliminary submittals, and we're accepting them now until about the end of March for this year, and we can give you the specific requirements of what we need to put in that submittal. We're sometimes flexible on that. We got a preliminary submittal from Jim Buchanan, and it was basically an office brochure. And we said, Jim, when you do your final submittal, it can't be an office brochure. And he said, I know, I know what I need to do. And we said, okay, and we accepted that. as his submittal, because we knew that he'd, Fentress Bradburn would put together a bang up submittal for him. So we can be flexible on what exactly those requirements are, but we do have specific requirements that will help guide you on what we need to do. And then our jury will get together April 1st, and we will meet again, the 9 of us, and we will judge those submittals, those preliminary submittals, and we will decide on whether they should be elevated to fellowship or not. And if not, we will talk about it with you and say why we made that decision. Or we will say, congratulations, you are nominated by the chapter. Get started, because you've only got 6 months to put together your submittal for October to go into national. But that's why we're doing it now. That's why we're doing this session in February, so that you have some time to put together. You have the next 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks, to put together a preliminary submittal that goes into the national or the local nominating committee. There is another way to get nominated. You can do it by petition, and by doing that, you can get signatures of 5 fellows in the Institute or 10 members in the Institute. Out of the 600 some submittals that I went through, not one of them was by petition. They were all nominated by their chapter. And people do that because if you see a nomination that was done by petition, you wonder why. Why wouldn't their chapter nominate them? What's something's a little funny here. And so doing it by petition is the last resort. You really don't want to do that. You want to go through the local committee, and the local committee is there not to tell you no. They're there to encourage you to. We want to present our best members and give them the best chance they have to get fellowship. Include your sponsor letter. Submissions without a sponsor letter are disqualified. In fact, submissions with only 6 of the 7 reference letters are disqualified. So make sure those are in there. So why do you go through all of this? Well, like Mike mentioned up front, this is the highest honor that the AIA can give, except the gold medal. When I was recently reading the obituary from Lamar Kelsey. Lamar died just less than 2 years ago. And one of the main accomplishments in his life that was listed in his obituary was he was elected to the College of Fellows at the Institute. It's a big deal. Out of the 95,000 members in the AIA, about 3% have been elevated to fellowship, about 3,000. The other neat thing about it is where you get your medal. It's at the convention each year. Unfortunately, we're doing virtual things right now, but we're going to get back to having actual conventions in actual places. 2007 was the first year I was on the national jury, and it was in San Antonio that year, and they set up chairs out in the street in front of the Alamo, and the 7 jurors sat in the front row of those chairs. And so we had our feet up on the curb of the street in front of the Alamo. And then they had everybody that got fellowship that year come up in front of the front door of the Alamo. That was kind of cool. They've done it on the steps of the Jefferson Memorial, Trinity Church, Disney Concert Hall. They set up grandstands in 1989. They set up a grandstand underneath the arch in St. Louis. The ceremony that you go through to get your fellowship is an exceptional event to go through. And if you are elected to fellowship, your children, your parents, everybody should be there. It's an exceptional time. The modern College of Fellows was founded in 1952. That's when they really defined what a fellow was. They hadn't really, there were fellows in the Institute, but it really got organized in 52. And the purposes of the College of Fellows is to stimulate a sharing of interests among fellows, promote purposes of the Institute, advance the profession, mentor young architects. We try to do that on a local level, and we're still always looking for ways that we can help do that if we can, and be of ever increasing service to society. Resources, there's a facts page at on the national website. There are that they will walk you through the fellowship, and highlighted here is the best examples, and that's valuable to go through, especially examples from the object you go in. By the way, you need to pick one object. You might say, well, wait a minute, my career is in design, but I've also taught, and I've also worked in government, and I'm actually in 3 different objects. You need to pick one. You can support that nomination by explaining what you've done in those other areas, but you still need to pick the one object to go in and focus on that. But it doesn't preclude you from talking about those other things that you've done. That is where we are. Mike, I will turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Phil.
My gosh, it did take an hour and a half.
Yeah, just as predicted from all the other times we've done it. So here's the part that we really want to cover before we adjourn today. If there's any questions you have that hasn't been covered, I know it's a lot of information to take in, and you probably came into this with some questions. Hopefully most of those got answered just in listening to Phil. But I'll say it really is a collegial and family type atmosphere when these awards are given. The Alamo was a little bit toasty though, Phil, out there in the Texas sun in the late spring, early summer. Other than that, it was a great time.
Yep.
And you mentioned that the jury, the national jury, is not your friend, but I do want to point out that the Fellows Nominating Committee of AIA Colorado is indeed your friend. If it sounded funny to you that they look at preliminary submittals and don't send them onto the board, it's because they want you to have the best chance of getting success. It's not because there's some club and you don't know the secret handshake. None of that. It's about making sure that because it's so limited and it will require, after your preliminary submission, a good amount of time and effort, we don't want you to waste that time and effort. We want you to put your best foot forward. And so the Fellows Nominating Committee are people who have been there and done that. They know what works and they know what stories the jury is looking for. So that's, and then for the board, the terminology on approval versus ratify, I've got just a little bit of experience here, but the board has never rejected any nomination from the committee. It's in fact one of the highlights of a board member's year to be able to see who's going to be put forward on our behalf to represent Colorado in this process. So just a lot to digest and look forward to. And I would say, just taking some editorial license here, it's not really whether you get fellowship or not in terms of the reason to do it. That by the time you get to the end and you've clicked send and you've worked with your sponsor, you've rekindled a work or professional friendship, you've gotten someone on the Fellows Nominating Committee who works with you one-on-one, that's now part of your network for the rest of your life. And you've had this exercise where you have done 2 things. You have cataloged the impact that you have made in one place, and you have achieved a clarity of purpose by doing that. And you realize you've spent so many hours away from your family and friends and everything else to pursue this profession at the highest level, that if anybody ever asks you, your grandkids or your kids or somebody you went at your high school reunion, so what have you been doing with your life? here's this fellowship submission that basically sums it all up, and you can be really proud of it. Even if the jury doesn't select you, that in itself is a huge thing to get from your career.
A number of years ago, when we got Jim Leggett's submittal, Jim, why do you think you should be elevated to fellowship? And he said, well, I published this book, and it's on architectural drawing. And look at this book, and I just got it published, and the local committee said, so what? What now? And just because you got this published, that's neat, but what's next? He came back 12 months later and said, okay, here's this book. It's now been translated into 5 different languages. It's now been accepted by over 50 universities as part of their curriculum. And we said, oh, there's impact, there's ripple, there's, okay, that's the so what. And we sent him forward that year, and it was a slam dunk submittal.
Yeah. Well, we got a comment from Paul Leaf, who gives his regards, Phil, and thanks for the information. And I want to point out for folks on the call, JP Arnold, who's a volunteer on our editorial committee, has been capturing these notes, has a lot to summarize. And so he's going to have a recap that we'll share based on this session today. Are there any questions or comments from anyone on the call before we wrap up? Comment from Tommy Matthews saying helpful session today. Thanks for being part of it.
And if anybody comes up with any suggestions, I'm chair of the nominating committee, and I have been off and on for 27 years. You got my phone number. Give me a call. Be glad to help out.
Okay, well, I think you covered just about everything that could be covered for now, and there's still time. So you mentioned the deadline, and the committee. That's also a very fun thing to do as somebody who works for AIA, is sit in on those nominating committee meetings and just see everything great that's happening around the profession in the state of Colorado. If you're wondering what happened to the last batch of nominees that were in the pipeline, or anyone else for that matter who has won a national award from AIA in our state's membership, we've got just the show for you. So on March 10th, same time, same channel, we have And the Winner Is, where we will hear from all the winners, new fellows, national award winners, and others who have won our highest AIA Colorado awards. That'll be on March 10th, Wednesday at noon. We hope to see you back then, or at any future session that we do. Look for those on our calendar on the website. And we wish you the best in your career, whether you go forward or not. We know that just thinking about this will change the way you view your work on a day-to-day basis. So thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of the week. Take care.